the increasingly obvious connection between Hamas and its policies, its demands, its strategies, and the so-called Kaplanites. That is to say, the extreme Israeli left that is proposing exactly what you described.
Look, when we had our first Kaplan force protests, I guess yesterday, with all, their new symbol is the bloody hand, the bloody hand. I want you to think about that symbol, because who used that symbol before? Remember when I think it was 2 Russian reservists that were slaughtered in Ramallah, and one of the murderers held his bloody hands out? Well, that became kind of the sigil, if you will, the symbol of the intifada against us. Well, where do we find it now? Oh, we find it on all the protests, the Kaplan Force and Brothers in Arms protest banners that are going up. Okay, so they held their first march, going back to, their rather sad and dreary opposition to everything writ Bibi, Bibi derangement syndrome. And I waited up all night, pretty much. Why? I wanted to see what Hamas would do. Wow, lo and behold, as if perfectly coordinated, they came out with an amazing policy statement that they're through talking. They're through talking. That if we want to discuss the hostages, we have to get out of Gaza and basically agree, capitulate to their various demands. Now, this may be an opening gambit, but an opening gambit like that sets the bar, just like you're dealing in the shuk, it sets it very high. And from what I understand, it scared the hell out of the government and the army, who are more concerned with, public opinion with regard to the hostages than they are the public necessity of finishing Hamas at all costs. To them, not to us. So here we have the situation, and now rumors are abounding that, no negotiations are starting again for a phased release of our hostages. Are we that stupid? Are we that criminally incompetent that we're going to knowingly play their game? I am sorry for the hostages. I am truly sorry. I empathize tremendously. But there's an important point we have to remember. It's only a small percentage of the hostage families that are involved in these protests, all under the supervision of the Kaplan Force. The Kaplan Force I've heard described by a very dear friend of mine as a twig on the tree of Israel. And that twig would rather uproot, destroy the tree of Am Yisrael, of Eretz Yisrael, just to accomplish its mission of destroying Bibi and throwing people like you and me and others that they resent for political rather than religious reasons out of government, so they can replant a new tree that will only have poisoned fruit. Period. Poisoned fruit. And they are willing to destroy our country in the process. They've shown us already over a year of their anarchy, of their attempted coup d'etat, because that's what it was. It had nothing to do with democracy. And now, because Tony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, told them, if you want to help us, we're going to help you. What do we need from you? We need you to switch your narrative from anti-judicial reform to bring the hostages back. That's to change the narrative, to change the war aim in order to basically prevent us from destroying Hamas, which should be the principal war aim. And in the process, Blinken told them, you'll also bring down Bibi and his entire government, because in the next election, the subsequent election, there will be such a visceral hatred against Bibi and his government coalition that they'll be voted off. They'll be chucked out. and you and more pliant leaders, again, cognitively impaired people like Gantz and like Eisenkot and others of their ilk, will take over and we'll have a new peace process and a two-state solution, and everybody will be satisfied, period. Well,
this is when even anti-Semitic and anti-Israel internationalist, realist strategists like John Mearsheimer admitted recently in an interview on the Unheard channel that that's what it's called, Unheard,
yeah.
UNHERD.
Yeah, I follow that.
One of the only positive outcomes of the virus mania, the COVID scam, that he admitted in a recent conversation with his Unheard host there that he sees no possibility whatever for a two-state solution, even though he himself did support such a thing.
Absolutely.
Until recently.
Correct. Look, the problem right now is that the media, certain elements in the military, and certainly people in our intelligence agencies and in the executive branch of government are so weak and irresolute that they have been manipulated both by Hamas and by the Americans and by our own local fifth column in the form of the Kaplan Force and Brothers in Arms. And that's what they are. They're a fifth column. That they're playing this game. Why are we going, can I ask you something? Why are we going house to house, losing our sacred soldiers? Why are we doing that? Because the IDF, unfortunately, the most trusted element of our government, according to polls, would rather sacrifice our men and women rather than anger the Americans in particular and the international community in general. Did we have the ability on October 8th to flatten Gaza from one end to the other? Yes, we did. And we didn't. Why? Because our military has this strange weakness when it comes to enemy casualties. Not when it comes to our casualties, our men and women. Oh, they can be sacrificed for the greater good. But when it comes to enemy casualties, I wasn't in favor of just destroying Gaza. Even within my understanding of this situation, I called for 1 day of warning to tell the people of Gaza, you need to get somewhere. And you need to get somewhere quickly, 24 hours. Other than if you don't make it, say goodbye. Because we're not going to be holding fire for anybody at that point. If we had done that, if we had obliterated Gaza in 1 week, and it was possible that we could have done that with non-nuclear weapons, obliterated Gaza, and then redeployed the bulk of that army that we had down there back up to the north, the Saudis would have paid particular attention to that. Because why? They would have realized we mean business. We're not going to fight with both hands tied behind our back, concerned about what the international community in general or the Americans in particular are concerned about. The Americans, by the way, I have to grant them, I have to credit them with being very candid in what their aims are. They were cleared last week in saying they want the war over because they need it for political gain in the next presidential election. That's where they're coming from. And what was our response? Oh, we understand them. We feel for them. We have to take their situation into account. Really. They can condemn our government for having Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich in the government, but we can't say anything about the crazies lefts, all the crazies in the Democratic Party. Well, we don't say anything about that. So the bottom line on this right now with these hostage negotiations is if we continue to go forward with this, and one last thing, our refusal to basically recognize the fact that the humanitarian aid convoys are being hijacked by Hamas, that Hamas is firing from refugee areas in southwestern Gaza, right under the guns of the supposedly the American mediators that are down there, observers. We're going to lose this war. And we're going to lose a lot of good men and women in the process. And we are not going to be able to go up north and do what we have to do against Hezbollah. That's what's at stake with regard to these hostage negotiations. Look, when you have a standoff and a guy is holding a gun to a young child's head and said, if you don't let me go, I'm going to blow this kid's head off. And you don't know whether he's serious or not, and everybody's watching, the best thing to do is to try at least to shoot the terrorists. At least try. If you don't, then pack your bags and leave, because they've got our number at that point. We have to be more ruthless and more terrifying than our enemies in order to deter them. It's a simple equation. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to appreciate this fact, but apparently it escapes both our military and our war cabinet, that the only thing that the enemy respects is our willingness to do whatever is necessary to destroy them. And if we're not willing to do that, then why are we wasting such wonderful people as our soldiers in Gaza? Pull them back, run the white flag up, surrender, become the 51st state. No, sorry, territory. The Americans would never allow us to have the dignity of the statehood, just the territory. So that's what's at stake right now when the Kaplan force goes walking. I have called for the government to declare a state of national emergency, which means the high court and the court systems don't work in that case, and to arrest the leaders of the Kaplan force and the hostage family organizations. We have to do this.
That should have been done on the very first day.
That should have been done on the very first day. The key to win, especially for a democracy, to win a war against ruthless enemies is to have discipline and to have a sense of a united nation. You can't have that.
To understand that the nation comes before the individual, even
Unfortunately,
before many individuals, such as 240 hostages.
I'm sorry to say this, but the needs of the many sometimes have to come at the expense of the few. And I've been condemned because they said, well, what about you, with Esther alayha shalom and all the public demonstrations she's held. And my answer to that, and I'm glad I have this opportunity to say this, there are many actions which are legal and appropriate in a time of peace that are not legal and not appropriate in times of war. Yes, Esther led a lot of street demonstrations on my behalf, but the survival of our country wasn't at stake at that time. It was the survival of one, held by an ally, no less. In this case, we have the survival, quite literally, of our entire country riding on the conduct of our war. Protests in favor, yes, even of the hostages, are detrimental to our ability to win. I said before that the government failed by not including the hostage families inside our deliberations, inside our organization that Gal Hirsch set up, a very, very capable general, to work on behalf of the hostages. Bibi, for whatever reason, kept them away. And in that vacuum, they were co-opted by the hard left, by the Kaplan forces. It's a very simple process that happened. And Tony Blinken
And it was
smart
very
enough to
easy.
take
It should be
advantage of it.
mentioned. It must be mentioned that it was very easy to co-opt them because, with few exceptions, the overwhelming majority of the families of the hostages of these brothers and sisters of ours, even though we may not agree on many things, but they are certainly our brothers and sisters, and
Absolutely.
we are most concerned for their welfare. But it has to be stated that the vast majority of those hostages and their families are radical leftists. Now, why is this relevant? Because the ideology of the left, of the woke, what today is called woke, or was once called the left, the ideology that essentially began to overtake the West sometime in the 60s, probably around the mid-60s, and with ever increasing force and fanaticism.
Insanity.
I was about to say insanity, but I opted for the word fanaticism. But yes, I accept your definition. That ideology stresses the benefit of the individual at the expense of the society,
At all costs.
of the nation. That
Correct.
the highest value is the individual human being. That is what postmodernism and extreme leftism, etc., comes down to in the analysis.
They banished all notion of altruism completely.
And therefore, when I opposed the hostage deal with Hamas about a month ago, I was asked why. How can you oppose such a thing? These poor people have been in captivity for so long, and it's the conditions under which they were being held must have been terrible, and we know something about this today. And of course that is true. And of course, my heart and our hearts bleed, and for them did and do. However, I answered those people and I said, just as we expect a soldier to put his own life at risk for the welfare of Klal Yisrael, for the Jewish nation,
correct,
because the nation comes before the individual, so we must at this juncture put the welfare and the future of the nation of Klal Yisrael. That's a Jewish halachic Torah concept, which means the historic entity of the Jewish people from the time of Avraham Avinu, Abraham, our forefather, down to the present day and into the unknowable future. That is the concept of Klal Yisrael. It's not the Jewish nation today. It is the Jewish nation as a concept, as a philosophical, historical entity, extended over thousands of years and into the future, into an indefinite future. What we call Netzach Yisrael, the eternity of the Jewish people. That must come before any individual, or even many individuals, their welfare, even their lives, unfortunately. And that is the only rationale on which basis you can send a soldier into combat.
Right. Look, having said this, and I agree with everything that you've said just now, obviously, we have to have a few caveats in this. Number one, not all the hostage families have been involved in these efforts.
No, I was careful to say the overwhelming majority, but yes, there are exceptions, very notable exceptions.
In fact, some of the
parents who have come forward and said, of course, I am concerned for my son's life and welfare, but the Jewish nation comes first.
Correct, absolutely. And so you have that, and we have to bear in mind the fact, at least I do, that our principal concern should be for the welfare, the safety, and security of our chayalim, of our soldiers. We have a sacred obligation to them, first and foremost now, to ensure that they do win this war with as few casualties as possible. And if that means, look, in military life, there are always situations where you have the story, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, of the heroic rear guard that sacrifices their lives, basically, so that their comrades can get away, can escape, can live to fight another day.
Such as the famous example in recent history is from the Second World War is the British stand at Calais.
Perfect. I think it was the 50th or 51st Division. It was I think a Scottish division.
I don't think it was a division. I was saying that I don't think it was a division. I think it was a regiment. And
it was a full division at Calais. It was a full division.
Maybe I'm making a mistake, but it was a limited force of I think 5,000 men, which is more than a regiment. So I guess you're right. I think it was 5,000 men, and they were given explicit orders: you must fight to the last man, to the last bullet, in order to allow them whatever number of the British Expeditionary Force that are able to flee from Dunkirk to do so.
Right. And the same thing happened with the Americans in the Philippines. The American garrison in the Philippines, I mean, fought to the last until they had to surrender at the Melinda Tunnel. So we have examples of this all the time. And for the enemy, every one of our citizens, including, I'm sad to say, babies, are considered appropriate military targets. We're all soldiers here, all of us. We don't have
particularly babies.
Particularly babies. And I'm proud to be a member of a people that values the life of children. It values the life of our fellow citizens. But it's not good. That love I have of my fellow countrymen and my fellow Jews is not going to be used by our enemies as a weapon against me. I'm sorry. It won't be. I was given that choice when I was in prison to be released in exchange for murders to be released here in Israel. And I didn't have to wait a second to say no. Absolutely not. My life isn't that important to set a precedent that will cost the lives of other Israeli citizens and fellow Jews. I'm sorry. You have to be able to say that. God gives you a choice.
And this is precisely what the prophet Yeshayahu, Isaiah, states in Perek Gimel Pasuk Yod Bet, chapter 3, verse 12. He speaks there about the leadership of the Jewish people in his day. And the three words I will quote from the verse are "V'nashim mashalu vo." They are ruled by women. Now, what does that mean? Yeshayahu was not a chauvinist, but he understood very well that women are much more likely to be swayed by emotions and feelings than by cold, hard reason.
Especially over the children.
Of course. Why is that? Because that is how the world must work. If women were not built that way, they could not care for their infants, for our children. Women have that capability much, much more than men do, because they are much more empathetic. They are much more patient. And that is how women are supposed to be. And that is exactly why women cannot lead a nation when it comes to such things, because hard, cold reason must trump feelings and emotion.
Correct. That's why we elect certain people to make those hard decisions.
But when those people are graduates of the Wexner Fund and the New Israel Fund and have been conditioned, brainwashed and mind controlled,
indoctrinated
in various universities such as Harvard, and we know all about the president of Harvard and Pennsylvania University, et cetera, et cetera. We recently became fully aware of their views and their opinions.
Could I offer one little news item?
Absolutely.
Which I think you'll find humorous. It's been reported by reliable sources that Harvard has a plan to reduce the number of Jewish students to 1 to 2% of their student body, to more accurately and appropriately reflect the number of Jews in American society at large. So the question arose, are they going to do that with their faculty as well? Are they going to reduce their faculty to 1 to 2% Jews? And the reaction, from what I understand from the faculty, is, Hashem is more. Of course they won't do that.
Well, they can leave themselves that monstrous woman president of Harvard, who was just recently come to light that she's a plagiarist. On a major scale. And it doesn't matter, of course, because the Harvard University, rather than immediately fire her, their first reaction to those reports was to send a letter from their lawyer to the New York Post, I think it was, who reported this fact that they will sue them.
Well,
because facts and reality and plagiarism don't matter. The only question is the color of the individual skin and political agenda.
Do you know who she plagiarized? Another
that I don't know.
Female black academic.
Well, that's even better, I suppose.
I guess you can't make this up.
No, you couldn't make it up. You really couldn't. At any rate, this is the reality. So, for example, this is why the head of military intelligence, Aaron Haliwa, who's of course one of the people who bears
principal responsibility,
and I would say is criminally negligent with regards to everything that has taken place, not just in the last 2 months or 70 odd days, but for years. He's been in charge of military intelligence. This is why just over a year ago, when he was giving a speech at the Herzliya conference about the strategic challenges facing Israel, what was one of the things at the top of his list? The climate catastrophe. Where did he get that notion from? We should be concerned about slightly warmer or cooler weather, or fewer storms, or more storms, which of course is all nonsense anyhow. It's all fake science. But the point is, this is how he was brain conditioned, brainwashed, and mind controlled into thinking. This is the strategic issue that Israel faces.
The Ramatkal, the chief of staff, Halevi, if you look at his schedule, he spent an inordinate amount of time since his appointment devoted to, wait for it, gender equality.
Well, there you go. That's obviously the main purpose of an army, a fighting force.
Not defending the Gaza envelope, not preventing Hamas from, building up a missile force, a conventional missile force that has the potential for wrecking and affecting a nuclear holocaust on us, the conventional equivalent, or Iran's nuclear weapons build up to threshold, or any of those things. Climate change and gender equality. Look, it's the same crap. When I asked a bunch of high-ranking officers, what is your definition of victory? Okay, simple question. And I was expecting a war college answer. Didn't get it. Finally, what did I get? This was the answer. Whatever the government says it is. And I said, that's not a professional answer. And we're seeing the effects of that now in Gaza. They don't know how to think decisively. The men do. Thank God for our men and women that are fighting right now. All praise to them. But they are overcoming their indoctrination, their little purity of arms, avodah zarah, all those things. And they're fighting hard, and I couldn't be prouder of them. But they're fighting in spite of their leaders, not with their leaders or under their control, but in spite of them. And God bless them for it and protect them.
Me, Tin, who could possibly grant us this wish that our soldiers should have leaders worthy of those soldiers?
They don't.
And
rare occasions.
Not the incompetent and imbecilic clowns that we have at the present time.
You pointed up with Finkelman or Finkelstein or whatever his name is, Finkelman, going after the graffiti, and now just recently we had this tempest in a teapot over two soldiers reciting the Shema over the loudspeaker of a mosque that had lost its protected status because there was a humongous arsenal there. There were snipers in the minarets, and it was a command center, a terrorist command center. Excuse me. Most people would say, "Hey, this place must be destroyed."
This is the same Israeli deep state that reprimands soldiers and actually withdraws them from combat duty because they recited Shema Yisrael, the famous and central tenet of faith of the Jewish people for thousands of years.
This is an insult
from the 6th chapter of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, in which we state that Hashem is our Lord and He is one. It's the same Israeli deep state that disallowed the Orthodox Jewish prayers to take place in Tel Aviv on Yom Kippur, and
precisely.
And this was recently upheld by a court in Israel.
Correct, because of the gender separation.
Because according to Jewish tradition and Jewish law, the sexes are to be separated as such an event.
But a couple of weeks
and that's what the public wanted, by the way, vast majority of them.
Correct, but a couple of weeks before, they allowed a gender-separated Muslim ceremony, religious ceremony, to take place without hindrance.
Obviously, because Israeli law only applies to Jews, not
Correct.
to Arabs. The Israeli police force for years.
So we do have an apartheid state.
We do. It's just not quite as portrayed by most people. The Israeli police force, ever since the Arab uprising in the year 2000 or 2001, according to the Gregorian calendar, I don't recall exactly, but going back over 20 years, if you recall, there were massive riots and upheavals in different places of the country, and it had to be put down by force. And ever since that time, the Israeli
that was up north.
That was in the north, and there was an official investigation into what happened. And the upshot of that investigation which was completely politically skewed and warped, was that the Israeli, and the practical upshot is as follows: the Israeli police force engages in applying the law only to Jews. The Arab sector in the country is essentially gets a free pass, and that's why there are hundreds of thousands of illegal weapons in this country.
Quite right.
In the possession of Arabs. Everybody knows it, and the Israeli government police force do nothing about it. But I personally know of a Jew who once had a hunting rifle in his possession purely for purposes of self-defense, because he had to drive home through areas where he was frequently attacked, and because the government would not give him a gun license. And he spent 2 years in jail because he had that gun in his possession.
Well, my father, who is all wise in these matters, once told me, it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. So you do what you have to do, and pray to God that you kind of dodge the officials.